Often our lives resemble a complex game where each move reflects our choices and decisions. Encounters, betrayals, family secrets all intertwine in the stories of our characters, prompting us to ponder the value of loyalty, love, and self-discovery. Immerse yourself in a gripping narrative about complex relationships where each hero seeks their path to happiness and truth. My name is Dennis, and I have been married for 25 years to my wife. I am an honest person and have always acted fairly. I believe that justice exists. I instilled this in my sons, who have already grown up and are building their future on their own. But I also taught them that situations occur in life that you cannot predict, and then you need to make the right decisions. This situation happened to me, and now I will tell you about it. Dennis, my mother's treating doctor, just called me. She only has a couple of months left to live, my wife, Mildred, said, and this news hit me early in the morning. I rubbed my eyes and wanted to know more about it. I need to go take care of her for a couple of months, and then I'll come back to you, I said. It was terrible news, not only because Mrs. Salinas was on the verge of death, but also because my wife, Mildred, might leave me for a couple of months. We've been married for 25 years, raised 2 sons who are now in college building their own lives in different cities. Unfortunately, Mildred's parents didn't like me, mostly because of her mother, who always said that her daughter deserved better. Her father, Mr. Salinas, passed away naturally, and as a result, Mrs. Salinas was left alone in another state. Mildred visited her often, at least a couple of times every 6 months, and even then, these visits were for a maximum of 2 days. Now it was hard for me to imagine that I would have to stay home alone for a couple of months, and it might even extend. Don't worry, we'll be in touch every day, and you can fly to me, where we can get a separate hotel to be alone and spend time together, Mildred said. So, you're not even considering the option of me going with you? How would you go? I'll take leave from my job, and if you stop working, it will be very bad, Mildred replied. She was right. We both worked our entire lives to give our children the best. We didn't have a luxurious house or car. We lived quite modestly, but were happy. Not every couple can boast about this after 25 years of married life. I got out of bed and went to wash up, to gather myself and discuss all the details with Mildred. I wasn't particularly thrilled about the news that we would have to be separated for an indefinite period, and perhaps, deep down, I wanted to mend relations with Mrs. Salinas. Why hide in hotels when you could talk to Mrs. Salinas, and she might allow me to stay at her house for a couple of days? I'll try, and I'll let you know right away, I said. It was difficult to come to terms with the fact that I would be alone in our house, but I had to work, especially since the thought of us meeting and me coming to her warmed me. A week later, Mildred packed all her things, and I escorted her to the airport. I'll call you as soon as I land. Thanks for your support, she said. We passionately kissed goodbye, and I sent her off on her flight. Returning home, I felt a sense of loneliness. After all, 25 years of shared life make themselves known, and I simply felt lonely. Mildred and I would call and chat via video every day. Our conversations could last for an hour or even more. In general, I was okay with it, but with each passing week, our communication became less and less frequent until we would call each other once a day and talk for a few minutes. Hi, sweetheart, I miss you. How are you doing? Will your mom mind if I come? I asked. Hi, it's better if you come next week, and we'll spend the night in a hotel, Mildred replied. I didn't understand why Mildred had so little time for conversations, considering she was just taking care of her sick mother, but apparently that's how it had to be. I didn't pressure her and waited for the weekend because, after 3 weeks, we would finally see each other. Upon arriving in the city, Mildred didn't even meet me. She sent me the address via SMS of the hotel where we were supposed to meet, and I went there and booked a room. But Mildred came to me late at night, explaining that her mother couldn't fall asleep for a long time. We had a pleasant night, and I was happy to see her, but the next morning, I woke up alone, and Mildred left me a note, explaining that her mom felt unwell, and she needed to urgently return home. I packed my things and flew back. I felt sad that we spent so little time together. I hoped to visit her at least once every 2 weeks, but Mildred kept changing plans all the time. 2 months passed, and during this time, I was at Mildred's place only twice, and those were late-night meetings. With each call, I stopped feeling her warm response. 2 months have passed. When will you come back home, Dennis? What's wrong? We're still in touch. It's not easy for me either, but I can't leave my mother, I explained. I tried to live a normal life at home and work, but loneliness was burning me from the inside. That's when I decided to meet up with an old friend named Roger. Hey buddy, don't you want to come over to my place today? Roger asked. Why not? Let's go somewhere, I replied. Roger had tried to pull me out of the house before, but I declined because I didn't want Mildred to worry about me. But now I needed to distract myself, especially since Mildred was always busy and I lacked real human interaction. Roger took me to a new bar called Sophistication, where you could enjoy good beer and play bowling or billiards. Having a few beers relaxed me a bit, and I felt relief for the first time in 2 months. Finally, I had a live conversation about all sorts of nonsense. When will Mildred come back home? Roger asked. I don't know. It's been 2 months, and I'm already irritated by the whole situation, I replied. Roger could see how tough it was for me, and I shared everything that was happening. He was shocked to learn that I had visited Mildred only twice and that our conversations were so brief. Listen, you can understand her. The main thing is not to get mad at her, and everything will be fine. Maybe it's a test for your relationship, Roger suggested. I agreed with Roger, and we continued our evening. After a couple of rounds of beer, we went bowling, and I got distracted from all my negative thoughts. During the bowling game, a group of 3 attractive girls approached us. Hi, we want to ask if you mind if we play with you. All the lanes are taken, one of the girls said. Yes, no problem. Let's play, Roger replied, and we started the game. One of the girls had an engagement ring. She was a slim and tall brunette with cute freckles, and it was evident that she was a bit shy. The most active among them was Nicole. Apparently, she wasn't married and decided to take her friends out to have a good time. She made a lot of jokes, and we all had a pleasant time together. I wasn't ashamed of spending time like this because if Mildred genuinely missed me and wanted to see me, she would have invited me at the first opportunity instead of postponing it. The evening ended on a positive note, and we stayed in the bar until midnight. The married girl left earlier than everyone, followed by her friend. Roger left, leaving only me and Nicole in the bar. I didn't want to leave because for the first time in months, I felt alive. Apparently, I was tired of spending all my time at home waiting for my wife. I love Mildred, and I'll wait for her, but I just decided to allow myself to relax. Nicole provided pleasant company, and we had heart-to-heart conversations. I made it clear to her that I was married, so she shouldn't expect anything more. However, it seemed that Nicole wasn't bothered by that. I was in real euphoria just sitting and chatting with someone. I won't deny that Nicole was very attractive and desirable, but I didn't feel drawn to her. I saw her as nothing more than a pleasant conversationalist. Closer to 2 in the morning, we decided to part ways, and I went home. Despite having very little sleep, my day at work was quite productive, allowing me to leave early. Mildred didn't even send me a short text message the whole day, so returning home, I decided to call her right away. I felt good and wanted to share my state with her. Oh, Dennis, will you ever stop? How many times do I have to tell you that I'll call you myself when it's convenient for me? And by the way, this Saturday, it's better for you not to come. Mom and I are going to the hospital, and she will probably stay there, and I'll be with her. Bear with me a little. I'll be back soon, she quickly said, and I didn't even have a chance to say a word. A few minutes later, I received a message on my phone saying, "Love you," and that reassured me. 2 days remained until Saturday, and if I didn't need to go to Mildred, I decided to go to the bar again and invite Roger. Unfortunately, he declined, so I went alone. Arriving at the bar on Saturday and sipping on a mug of beer, I reflected a lot. I couldn't understand why everything was dragging on and why I had to spend my time in the bar waiting for my wife. I felt upset, but then I remembered Roger's words, who said it's a good relationship test, and that thought comforted me. My contemplation was interrupted by a hand touching my shoulder. It was Nicole's delicate hand. "I thought you wouldn't come back here anymore," she said. "Well, I decided to take a break this Saturday evening," I replied. Nicole asked why. Being a married man, I spent my time in the bar, and I decided to share my story with her. I didn't reveal all the details, just told it as it was. Nicole was understanding and shared her story. Her ex-husband often went on business trips, and because of that, Nicole spent a lot of time at home. However, everything would have been fine if he hadn't cheated on her every time she found out about the infidelity, accidentally looking into her husband's phone. I expressed deep regret, but Nicole said she had coped well with the situation and considered it a valuable experience, albeit a sad one. After that, we moved on to simpler topics and just chatted. I enjoyed being in Nicole's company. I couldn't call it flirting, more like a friendly conversation. I liked that Nicole treated me with understanding and didn't cross boundaries, which was important to me at that moment. I realized that I missed female companionship, and we started meeting almost every day at this bar, simply enjoying each other's company. A week passed, and I had to get ready to fly to Mildred, but she once again postponed my visit. This situation began to bother me because it had been 3 months since Mildred left, and during this time, we had only seen each other twice. So, I decided not to listen to her and fly on my own, planning to surprise her. At some point, I even felt ashamed that my wife was taking care of her sick mother while I, in her absence, roamed bars and talked to other women. I decided to fly on Friday with a firm intention to talk not only with Mildred but also with Mrs. Salinas. I wanted to mend my relationship with her, especially since I believed that being in such a situation, a person would not waste their energy on negativity. Boarding the flight, by evening, I was in the city and decided to call Mildred, but her phone was off. I had no choice but to go to Mrs. Salinas' house. I knew the address since we had been to their home a couple of times before, so I quickly reached it from the airport. Standing in front of Mildred's parents' house, I felt some internal anxiety. I was afraid that Mrs. Salinas would be very angry to see me, especially because during our last meeting, she yelled so loudly that she had a nervous breakdown and an ambulance had to be called. Summoning courage, I knocked on the door, but no one answered. After waiting for another 5 minutes, I realized it was useless, and most likely, Mildred was in the hospital with her mother. Suddenly, a taxi approached the house and just stopped across from it due to the tinted windows. I couldn't see who was sitting in the back seat. I stood there watching, and nothing happened. I thought the taxi had come for me, but I hadn't called one, so I decided to approach it. Suddenly, my wife, Mildred, neatly stepped out of the back seat. She did it so quickly that I only managed to see someone's silhouette sitting in the back with her. She looked quite nervous, and those were the first words she uttered. "Dennis, what are you doing here?" she asked. I felt that she clearly didn't expect to see me, so I wanted to approach her, hug her, and kiss her. However, she quickly evaded me and headed into the house, opening the door and heading to the bathroom. "Sorry, I really need to use the bathroom," Mildred said. She looked very elegant, wearing some new short skirt and a blouse that revealed half of her chest. I entered the house and realized that Mrs. Selena no longer lived there. Everything was clean and tidy, as if the house was being prepared for sale. I sat on the couch and waited for Mildred, who spent 15 minutes in the bathroom. She came out in just a towel and explained that she decided to take a shower since she had been running around all day and spent half a day with her mom in the hospital. She looked so sexy that I couldn't resist. I approached her and kissed her passionately. She clearly didn't expect this, but didn't resist. Then I gently took the towel off her and touched her body. I felt the fulfillment I had been missing so much in recent weeks. I'd been talking to Nicole, and I liked her. I was afraid I would lose my passion for my wife, but it seemed like I started to love her even more. Mildred tried to say something to me, but I picked her up and carried her to the bedroom. We ended up in some room with a large double bed. I gently threw her on the bed while I took off all my upper clothes. Mildred tried to reach for something, but I managed to interrupt her and climbed on top of her. She stopped resisting and completely surrendered to me. Her moans were so loud that I didn't want to stop. I touched her hair, hands, thighs, waist, chest, kissed her neck and lips. I missed all of this so much. Her moans echoed throughout the house. I had never heard her moan so loudly. Besides, Mildred made some new moves that made it even more enjoyable for me. I lay on her and lowered my head to her neck, continuing the process, when suddenly I felt her reaching for something. I abruptly raised my head and saw Mildred hiding something under the pillow with her right hand. "What are you doing there?" I asked. "Nothing," she replied. I reached under the pillow and pulled out a pack with a used condom. I abruptly stopped, staring at the packaging, then began to carefully inspect the room. On the floor near the entrance to the bedroom were not my men's socks. On the bedside table stood a bottle of champagne, and next to it lay someone else's wallet. I took the wallet and pulled out the driver's license. It had the name Terry Ruiz written on it and smelled just like Mildred did when she avoided me during our encounter near the house. At that moment, a complete picture floated in my mind. I realized why Mildred decided to immediately take a shower. She was afraid I would detect the scent of another man on her and wanted to wash away all traces of her infidelity. Most likely, her mother no longer lived in this house. Mildred lived here with another man. Then, I abruptly got up from the bed. Mildred became repulsive to me. I looked at her body again, and nausea overcame me. I rushed into the bathroom and saw 2 toothbrushes there. In the corridor, there was not only Mildred's footwear, but also a pair of men's shoes. Mildred ran out of the room and began to beg me not to jump to conclusions. She was apparently afraid that I would resort to physical actions, but that wasn't my style. I didn't want to end up in prison, so I went to gather my things. Mildred tried to justify herself, but her tears and excuses only further confirmed the fact of her betrayal. She chose an extremely unsuccessful tactic. My world collapsed. I couldn't believe that the closest person to me, with whom I had spent 25 years together, had deceived me all this time. I packed my things and ran out of the house to catch the next flight. On the other side of the street, I saw the silhouette of a man who was clearly watching me. I didn't do anything, went in the opposite direction, called a taxi, and headed to the airport. Throughout my journey, Mildred tried to contact me, but I didn't respond. I realized that serious measures needed to be taken. Just now, my husband Dennis stormed out of my late mother's house, who unfortunately passed away a few days ago in the hospital. I felt great shame. I did not expect Dennis to come to me. I was planning to return home in a few days and surprise my husband. It was a difficult period in my life, and I had to compromise with my mother. When I had just arrived, my mother asked me for one favor, to leave Dennis and try a relationship with a guy named Terry, whom my parents had set me up with. They wanted me to marry a wealthy guy. His parents were involved in some business, and Terry was well off. So, 25 years ago, when I introduced Dennis to their house, my mother was immediately upset. She wanted me to marry Terry. I didn't listen to them and made the decision to be with Dennis because I loved him. But when I returned to my sick mother, she wanted me to at least try a relationship with Terry. A couple of days later, Terry came to my mother's house, starting to court me. I made it clear to him immediately that I didn't want a relationship with him and that we would just play a role for my mother. Terry silently listened to me. My mother was happy. Terry and I deliberately acted like a couple, pretending that I enjoyed spending time with him, although it was terrible for me. Every evening I cried because I was forced to do this and was afraid to tell Dennis because he would come and take me away, which would greatly affect my mother, who was already in a difficult situation. I never listened to my mother, but seeing her painful condition, I couldn't disobey her. Terry and I slept in different rooms, but literally after a couple of weeks, the situation changed. Terry invited me to a restaurant under the pretext of having a meal. We had some wine, and my first intimate encounter with him happened in the same hotel where Dennis and I had stayed a few days ago. I don't know why, but I enjoyed the intimacy. Maybe it was due to the influence of alcohol or because it had been a long time for me. But after that, we started sleeping together in my mother's house. I didn't consider it as betraying my husband. I convinced myself that I was just playing a role for my mother and nothing more. For me, it was just a game. My mother started seeing our relationship and was very happy about it. In the second month, my mother was admitted to the hospital, and the doctor said she had only a couple of weeks left to live. I took this news very hard, and I needed support. I don't know why, but I started inviting Terry when there was no need for it. It didn't occur to me that I could invite Dennis to the house, and we could spend a few days together. But I was afraid of him coming here because I understood that he would immediately realize the fact of my infidelity. I physically cheated on Dennis, but not emotionally. I still love Dennis and want to live with him. I saw his gaze as he frantically searched the room for signs of my unfaithfulness. I got scared, thinking he might not endure it and would want to hit me, but he didn't. He ran out of the house and disappeared from my sight, and I was left crying in the house, not knowing what to do next. A couple of minutes after Dennis left, Terry entered the house, who was with me in the taxi. "Mildred, what happened? Did your husband get out?" he asked. He tried to hug me, but I pushed him away and ended up kicking him out of the house. The whole night, I couldn't sleep and was afraid that Dennis would now tell everything to our sons. His parents would freeze our accounts, change the locks in the house, and completely erase me from his life. The next few days were filled with stress as I prepared the house for sale on my own, and Dennis never reached out to me. Every time I checked my phone, I anxiously opened the bank profile to see our accounts, but Dennis didn't block anything, giving me minimal hope. On Tuesday, I decided to return home, postponing the sale of the house. I couldn't think straight, so I wanted to go back to Dennis, talk to him, and hoped he would forgive me. I sent him a text with my flight number, hoping he would pick me up from the airport, but alas, it didn't happen. I had to get to the house on my own. I inserted the key into the door and sighed with relief. The key worked, meaning Dennis hadn't changed the locks. I entered the house and was surprised. It was crystal clean, everything was in its place, the floors were mopped. Going into the kitchen, I saw the same. It seemed like no one had lived in the house. The fridge was full, the dishes were clean, the windows were spotless. This gave me hope that Dennis was just upset with me and probably would forgive me. I went upstairs with relief, hoping to find him there. Entering our bedroom, I saw the same cleanliness. The bed was perfectly made, but there was something on it that caught my attention. On the bed lay a folder with documents, and on it, in large letters, was written "Divorce Documents." My world collapsed, and next to the documents was a note. "Don't try to find me, it's pointless. I trusted you, and you deceived me so shamelessly. You can live in this house, I don't care. When you read this, call my lawyer, the number is on the back of the note." I started to cry, my hopes crumbled in an instant, and I didn't know where to go. I don't remember exactly, but I spent about 3 hours sitting by the bed, wiping away my tears. I wanted to find Dennis and talk to him, explain my position. I'm sure he would understand and forgive me. I wiped away my tears and tried to think where he might be at the moment, either at work or with his friend Roger, if I remember his name correctly. Dennis mentioned a couple of times that he went to a new bar with him to play bowling. First, I decided to call his workplace to find out if he was there today, but his boss said he had a day off. So, I went online and started searching for a bowling bar. Fortunately, there was only one in our entire city. I immediately called a taxi and went to that place. Approaching the bar, I became scared. What if Dennis is inside, and what will I say to him? Thoughts began to frighten me, but I gathered my courage and walked inside. I was eagerly awaiting the divorce to have her all to myself. As usual, we were playing bowling and having a good time. Roger and his girlfriend were with us when suddenly Nicole touched my shoulder and whispered in my ear, "Turn around." Turning around, I saw Mildred staring at me. I didn't expect to see her in this bar, so I told Nicole not to worry. I put my arm around Nicole's waist, and we turned away from Mildred. Mildred stood there for about 5 minutes watching us. I didn't even want to look at her, so I asked Roger to approach Mildred and explain everything. Roger gladly accepted my proposal and went to talk to Mildred. All I heard in the end was a scream that echoed throughout the bar, "Traitor." After that, a loud slam of the door followed. I didn't feel guilty because I kept my wedding vows, and at least I didn't cheat on Mildred physically, unlike her. I hoped our divorce would be peaceful because I had no intention of ruining her life. I respected this woman, at least up to a certain point, so I hoped for an amicable outcome. To my great relief, Mildred didn't resist and granted the divorce calmly. Mildred tried to explain her position to me several times, but I wasn't interested. No betrayal can be justified. The only thing she wanted to know was if I cheated on her with Nicole. I answered no, and it was the absolute truth. Nicole and I engaged in our first sexual encounter literally after my official divorce. She waited for me. Nicole ignited a new spark in me and helped me cope with this situation, for which I am very grateful. She truly saved me. I don't consider 25 years of marriage a waste of time. It was a happy time for me, and I have no regrets. Now, I'm so happy in my new relationship, probably even more so because I am valued and respected, which unfortunately wasn't the case in my past relationships. Mildred started dating a guy named Terry. She fulfilled her mother's request and moved in with him. I don't know if she loves him or if it's all for the money. I don't care. What matters to me is that I am happy and living an honest life. A story like this one makes you think about the complex trials and experiences that can intertwine people's lives. It contains numerous emotional nuances, evoking sympathy and understanding for the characters. It serves as a reminder that each of us may face challenges and choices that will shape our happiness and our future. Story 2. I am an ordinary college teacher. I never liked noisy companies and parties. I had enough time to spend with my wife, watch a movie with her, or just talk. And then we had a wonderful son, and I completely immersed myself in the family. But I did not even suspect that one day would change my life to before and after. I am Ryan Young, a 34-year-old man working as a college teacher and thoroughly enjoying my position. I have a 32-year-old wife, Doris, and we've been together for 8 years. During this time, we welcomed a wonderful son named Keith, who just turned 4. If asked whether I am happy, I would confidently say yes. Everything is going well in my life, following its course. By the way, Doris also works as a college teacher. It's our joint venture. We met when we were studying in college, and I had no idea that I would marry this girl. We simply collaborated on projects, spent a lot of time studying, and discussed science. We could stay at each other's homes and retreat to our rooms. I believe that when a man and a woman have such close contact, a connection is inevitable. It happened to us. Initially, we exchanged glances, but things progressed further and further until Doris found herself on my writing desk right in front of me. Our first time happened in my room, with parents on the other side of the wall. We tried to be as quiet as possible to avoid being heard. Despite Doris not being into sports, she had a beautiful figure and a tender, youthful body. We realized our mutual attraction when our meetings became a daily occurrence. We had intense passion leading us to decide to become a couple. Later, I proposed to Doris. Doris's parents were very supportive. Her father, Mr. Wilkins, was a petroleum engineer, and they were well off enough to gift us a house where Doris and I settled successfully. I don't know what we would have done without them because, to be honest, with my teacher salary, it would have taken me 10 years or even more to save up for such a house. So it was an excellent foundation for starting a family. We often visit Doris's parents, and I enjoy spending time with them, feeling like a true family. Doris was not the only child. When Doris was little, her mother decided to leave Mr. Wilkins, leaving him with young Doris. After that, Doris stayed with her father, and it was a challenging period in their lives. Her father drank a lot, and Doris had to take care of household duties besides her studies, which was quite tough. Over time, everything changed for the better when Mr. Wilkins introduced a woman named Beverly. She had escaped from her ex-husband, who regularly subjected her to physical abuse, not only her, but also their son, Albert, who was 4 years younger than Doris. As a result, Mr. Wilkins married Beverly, and Doris gained a stepbrother. They had a close-knit family, but there was one aspect that always bothered me: Doris's brother, Albert. I can't say I had negative feelings toward him. On the contrary, I was neutral. However, Doris always wanted me to get along with him. "Get along with Albert," she'd say. Normally, I don't understand what the problem is. Can't you see how he looks at me with disdain? He looks at you just fine. You're making up problems in your head again and getting upset over nothing. I don't know why, but I felt some dislike toward her brother. Still, the most important thing for me was that my relationship with Mr. Wilkins was good, and I didn't care much about Albert. I understood that Doris wanted us all to be friendly, but I don't know, this guy annoys me. I never told Doris directly, but I often noticed how Albert looked at her, how he interacted with her. It seemed like he wanted her, so I tried to keep Doris away from him. Maybe I'm going crazy thinking this way, but anything is possible in life, so this situation bothered me. Doris and I also had a massive argument when I came home from work and saw Albert in our house, sitting in the kitchen, having a friendly conversation with Doris. I understand he's her brother and all, but first, he wasn't her biological brother, and second, to me, he was always a stranger. And what should you do when a stranger is on your territory, right? Kick him out. So, I tactfully and without aggression escorted Albert out of my house and tried to explain my position to Doris, but she refused to listen. To be honest, it always irritated me when Doris interacted with her brother. I'm not a tyrant and didn't want to restrict Doris in anything, but her brother, at 28, hadn't started a family, still lived in his parents' house, and kept taking odd jobs. I didn't like his lifestyle. Maybe if he had achieved a certain status, I would have befriended him, but as it stood, he was a freeloader who meddled in our private life. When Doris and I planned to go shopping in the city because we had received our salaries, we decided to leave Keith with her parents. And you know what? When we came to pick up Keith, Albert had tagged along. He spent the entire day with us, holding back a lot and enduring for the sake of his wife, always making concessions. So when I saw Albert's name on the guest list for my birthday, it just exploded inside me. I was supposed to have my birthday in a week, turning 35, a milestone, a round number. We planned to rent a house for a party and invite all our friends to sit together and celebrate. I used to dislike such parties, but Doris insisted strongly, especially because she wanted to have some fun. We intended to invite at least 20 people, including ourselves. These were all people we went to college with and we actively maintained connections with. However, when I saw Albert on the list, Doris and I had a real showdown. Doris tried to convince me that Albert is also a close member of our family and he would be deeply hurt if we didn't invite him. She told me that Albert would behave appropriately and that he's her brother who helped her get through a difficult childhood, and I should accept him at least for her sake. It was hard for me to agree, but in the end, she managed to persuade me because I didn't want to argue with her. 2 weeks after my birthday, we were supposed to fly to the islands for a proper vacation. This trip was important to me because we had been saving up for it for over 3 years, so I didn't want to spoil the mood for both of us. A day before my birthday, Doris and I went to see the rented house, and it was simply fantastic. A large outdoor pool, a barbecue, a spacious cozy hall with darts, a pool table, a great audio system, everything for a good time. Looking at the house again, I realized that I did want to relax, considering that I didn't do it as often as I would have liked. After inspecting the house, we went to a restaurant, drank wine, and chatted about our future. I was happy to be with Doris. She was a real goddess to me for whom I was ready to take all the laurels. Returning home, we were completely alone because Keith had gone to his grandparents for a couple of days. So, Doris and I had an unforgettable evening. We first took a bath together and then, wrapped in a single towel, we lay down in bed. My cool body touched Doris's warm body, which looked absolutely stunning. I was sure that all the college students lusted after her, and I was so happy that she was only mine. The day of my birthday arrived, and I woke up to my son, Keith, bouncing on the bed, shouting, "Happy birthday, Dad." It melted my heart as I stepped into the hallway. My parents, Doris's parents, Doris and Albert, greeted me. I wasn't bothered at all that Albert was here. Everyone wished me well, and we headed to the dining table. The plan was to spend the first half of the day with our parents and gather for a party at our house in the evening. The beginning of the day was fantastic. We spent time with our closest ones, and around 2 in the afternoon, Doris and I were alone in the house getting ready to leave. I playfully disrupted Doris from getting ready. I was in a playful mood when I saw the lingerie she was wearing today. I couldn't resist, and we ended up making love. Something in me awakened, and I felt hyperactive. It seemed like I could conquer anything at that moment. It reminded me of the feelings from childhood during holidays, and I was happy to experience it again. Ready to leave, Doris and I had to pick up a couple of people, Justin and Jane, who were going to help us with the house preparations, and Albert, whom we had to wait for about 20 minutes. At that moment, I wanted to start expressing impatience, but then quickly calmed down, choosing not to spoil the mood for myself and those around me. Upon reaching our destination, we began the usual preparations. Doris's friends also arrived to help with cooking. Their task was to prepare tasty cocktails and a couple of snacks, as we planned to buy the main food. Meanwhile, the guys and I took care of all the technical aspects, moving sofas, setting up the audio system, and, in general, handling the manly work. Literally within 2 hours, everything was ready for the celebration. By this time, the main crowd had arrived. Unfortunately, a couple of people couldn't make it, so there were exactly 18 people, including me and Doris, but it didn't bother me at all, so we continued the fun. Everyone was slightly tipsy. We started with group games, which were our specialty. The evening went pretty well. Everyone laughed and enjoyed themselves. I intentionally didn't drink much to keep a clear head. I knew my limits and didn't want to consume too much alcohol, unlike Doris, who was already quite drunk. The real fun began when one person wanted to jump into the pool, then another, and soon half of the guys were in the pool. I didn't want to swim, so I watched everything from the sidelines with my friend Justin. Doris was also in the pool. She deliberately wore her best and most revealing swimsuit, looking stunning. I hoped the water would sober her up a bit. Albert jumped into the pool later, causing real chaos. He splashed around with everyone, and it seemed like everyone was having fun. I was also invited, but I declined because I didn't want to. I noticed Albert getting very close to Doris. It looked like they were engaged in some conversation, but after a few minutes, Doris decided to get out of the pool and approached me. She began to plead with me to join everyone in the pool, but I said I would take a dip when the pool was semi-empty. I hinted to her that I wanted to swim separately with her while everyone else was in the main hall of the house. Doris listened to me and pretended as if she understood everything, but unexpectedly, she pushed me so hard that I fell into the pool fully clothed with my phone and cocktail. She started laughing and had more alcohol. I was upset by her actions. I just didn't expect such a betrayal. But then Doris jumped straight to me, and we started kissing. I felt uncomfortable because most people were already heavily intoxicated, and I had hoped for a cultured evening, not this debauchery. I left the pool. I was getting annoyed with what was happening. I wanted a classy party, but it turned into complete debauchery. I went into the house and headed to the second floor to a room to change. I heard someone having sex in the adjacent room, but I didn't bother them and went into another room. There were a total of 4 people on the second floor. I began changing clothes, doing it as slowly as possible, hoping that Doris would come to me. At least she saw what mood I was in, and she knew I went to change, so I comforted myself with the thought that she would come soon. But the minutes dragged on, and there was no sign of Doris. Then I decided to abandon this tactic. I finished changing, left the room, and went downstairs to the hall where a couple of guys were sitting. I engaged in a conversation with them. I can't say how much time passed, but about 20 minutes by the feel of it. During this time, many people had left the pool. I decided to go outside to check on Doris, but I didn't see her in the pool. Then I asked Justin, who was swimming at the time. He said he didn't know where Doris was. She left the pool at about the same time as I did and went to the house. I didn't understand how it happened because I was sitting and waiting for her in our room. How could we have missed each other? Then I glanced at the pool again and didn't see Albert in it. My heart skipped a beat. I thanked Justin for the information and headed to the house, quickly going upstairs to the second floor. I started listening for sounds. It was quiet, but from the opposite room, I heard soft slapping sounds as if someone was being intimate. Approaching that door and putting my ear to it, I started listening to what was happening inside and heard distinct sounds of intense passion. I tried my best not to think of the worst and just tried to listen to discern whose moans those were. Suddenly, someone touched my shoulder. It was Justin. I gestured for him to be quiet and not make any unnecessary noise, and he understood. Together, like true gents, we stood by the door and listened. At some point, Justin came up with an idea. He suggested knocking on the door and asking when the room would be available, and then, by the voice, we could determine who it was. Justin confidently knocked and asked when the room would be available. A female voice immediately replied, "We need another 10 minutes." At that moment, I thought I was going crazy because it was the distinct voice of my wife, Doris. Justin confirmed my suspicions, and we couldn't think of anything better than to break down the door. After 2 strong blows, people from downstairs came to see what we were doing. From the 4th strong blow, we managed to break down the door, revealing such a scene before us. My wife completely naked lies on the bed, and on top of her is Albert. The most insulting part was that throughout all of this, Albert continued the act. He clearly wasn't himself, while Doris apparently quickly came to her senses and started pushing Albert off her. "I was looking for you," she began to say. I just looked at her and then turned to the crowd, which was watching it all with shouts. I asked them to go downstairs. Only Justin stayed with me, and we entered the room. The first thing I wanted to do was hit Albert, but Doris began to defend him. Albert, however, was so drunk, and it was evident that he was unwell. He couldn't hold it and started vomiting right on the bed. I felt disgusted. Approaching them at that moment, Doris stood up swaying and began to approach me, apologizing. It was sickening to watch all of this, and I rushed out of the room and then out of the house. I saw the crowd of eyes looking at me. I asked for a taxi, and everyone started looking for a car for me. There was a guy named Wayne who hadn't been drinking and wanted to drive me. I was still downstairs when suddenly I heard a loud scream, "Sorry," and saw Doris naked rolling down the stairs into the common area. Everyone could see her in that state. I was so ashamed that I left the house as soon as possible. I didn't care about anything anymore. I wanted to go to Mr. Wilkins and explain the whole situation to him. I felt completely sober and aware of everything I saw in the house. Wayne was my classmate at school, and we maintained a good relationship, so we drove in silence all the way. He turned on loud music and just drove me. At the end of the way, I thanked him and went to the Wilkins house. It was midnight, everyone had been asleep for a long time, but I didn't care. And after a couple of unsuccessful tries, finally, Mr. Wilkins opened the door for me, and then his wife joined us. Justin texted me, in which he said that Doris eventually fell asleep in the bathroom. She felt sick. I was not surprised and began to tell Doris's parents the whole story. Mr. Wilkins already had gray hair, but after my story, it felt like it had become even grayer. Mr. and Mrs. Wilkins sat in disbelief and did not understand how this could happen. They shared that when Doris and Albert were teenagers, they hid and slept together at night. They were caught and scolded a couple of times, but they did not think that such childish pranks would affect adult life. Mr. Wilkins advised me not to make hasty decisions and suggested discussing everything with Doris. Reluctantly, I agreed, but later decided to go through the gallery on my phone and started scrolling through photos. When it hit me, I came across a picture of Albert and Keith on Keith's birthday, and it seemed to me, but I noticed a resemblance in their facial features. It horrified me, and I went into Keith's room where he was peacefully sleeping. I began comparing their faces and found many similarities. I asked Mr. Wilkins if he noticed anything, but the answer was negative. Losing trust in him, I quickly woke up Keith and headed home with him. I just couldn't believe that one day could change my life so drastically. I didn't sleep the whole night and awaited the clinic's opening. As a precaution, I decided to hide the money Doris and I were saving for a joint trip. I took a DNA test, and the results would take 3 days. During that time, I took measures to secure myself completely, such as freezing the bank accounts, changing locks at home, and more. The next day, I received over 15 videos, starting from the moment I broke the door and ending with what Doris staged. The next day, Doris slept in the bathroom all night, and then she started throwing a tantrum and wrecking the entire house. I found it amusing because by the documents, she rented this house, and it was her idea, meaning she'd have to pay for the broken door and the mess. But then her parents came, taking her and Albert home. I don't know what happened there, but for all those days, neither Keith nor I were bothered. Friends called and supported me. Rumors of Doris's infidelity had already spread in college, but what consequences she would face remained unknown. Meanwhile, I received the DNA test results on paternity, and it turned out to be negative. I looked at Keith, and it was difficult for me to accept that he wasn't my son. I just couldn't believe it. It was a very delicate truth for me. I filed for divorce, hoping that Keith would stay with me and Albert wouldn't claim him. A month later, the court ruled that Keith would stay with his biological parents as he was still young and wouldn't understand much at his age. I felt sad about this news, but later I found out that Mr. Wilkins deliberately made Albert take the child. I found it to be a pathetic move. Mr. Wilkins and Doris didn't say a word to me. They avoided communication, although I was the victim in this situation. Doris lost her job. She was fired from her teaching position because everyone in college knew about the incident at home and talked about it. Her reputation was tarnished, and she was to blame for it. In the end, I had to move to another house, and now I live completely alone. I managed to keep most of the money and leave Doris with nothing. She only got a portion of the proceeds, not the full amount. What I know now is that Doris and Albert live with their parents, raising their child. No matter how terrible it sounds, none of them reached out to me. They clearly resented me, but I didn't care. The most important thing was that no one else turned away from me. Everyone supported and sympathized with me. Later, I found out that Doris and Albert had a connection for a long time, engaging in intimacy regularly, considering it a normal occurrence. I was horrified, and even after 1.5 years, I still regret having entered into marriage with this woman and spent 8 years in it. It was a complex and emotionally challenging story, and I'm sorry you went through such difficulties. It's important to maintain your own morality and emotional well-being in such situations. Support from friends and family, as well as seeking help from professionals, can aid in recovery from such trials.